The manga starts with a Korean doctor standing on a bridge. The doctor is frustrated because the hospital where he works is full of people infected and more people are arriving for treatment. The hospital's reputation continues to drop because of malicious comments on social media, with some even saying that this was not the reason the man on the bridge had chosen to become a Korean medicine doctor. The doctor is frustrated and can't believe he's buried in debt, as even after 3 years, the debts have not been paid off. At this moment, the doctor wonders why the virus appeared right when he had opened his clinic. The doctor begins to question why, even after people visited his clinic, they remained infected with the virus. He starts thinking that none of this was his fault, as he didn't want it to happen. The bridge the doctor is on is one where cars pass above, and below it, there is a river flowing in one direction. Suddenly, the young doctor stumbles and falls off the bridge. At that moment, he sees the sky beneath his feet before plunging into the river. After sinking many meters below the river, the young man dies. Then something unexpected happens. It's impossible to imagine that a normal Korean medicine doctor would become a divine doctor in a novel. A status screen appears, revealing some information. One of these reveals that the life point system is active and that the young man could earn life points from his internal organs through treatment. The system shows that by investing the life points he acquires, the young man could unlock various abilities or summon creatures. The screen indicates that the young man currently has no life points. The young man is confused. Then, after seeing a face staring at him, he begins to think that it could be someone from the rescue team. He starts to think he's being rescued after falling into the river and drowning. The young man begins to think that perhaps he could start his life over again, since he did not die. But when he wakes up, he still does not realize that he is in another world and in another body. The young man understands it's better to be alive with a mountain of debt than dead. So, lying in bed, he raises part of his body and tells the man in front of him that he'll be more careful next time. After looking around, the young man realizes he's not in a hospital, and the furniture is very different from what he's used to. At this moment, he starts thinking that maybe he's on a medieval film set since everything around him seems ancient. The man near the young man starts crying and asks if the young man can see him. The young man is startled, as he has no idea who the man next to him is. Without thinking, the young man asks the man what his name is. The man asks if the young man doesn't remember anything, and then says that regardless, he will continue to serve him. The man introduces himself as Garden and says he's the young man's personal doctor. Garden is the personal doctor of the Crown Prince, Piro Garden. At this moment, the young man wonders what the doctor means by that, so he asks the doctor to bring him some water. After looking at the cup the doctor brings, the young man notices it's made of gold and has diamonds around it. As he drinks, the young man looks into a mirror across from his bed and realizes that he's no longer an adult from Korea, but instead a young man with white hair and blue eyes. Seeing his own reflection in the mirror, the young man gets scared and ends up choking on the water. But then the doctor starts cleaning his mouth with a cloth. The young man can't understand why his reflection looks so different. At this moment, the young man remembers a novel he read before going for a drink after work. One of the characters was named Raquel Adria Magentano from Demon Sword Emperor. After staring directly at the doctor, the young man asks him to slap him in the face. Dr. Garden is shocked by the request and asks why. The young man decides to slap his own face to check something. After slapping himself, the young man starts feeling a lot of pain, and the doctor asks if he's okay. At that moment, the young man realizes that he's not dreaming and that he is the crown prince from the novel he had read. Raquel is happy because the mountain of debt and interest he accumulated with his failed clinic no longer exists. The young man starts thinking that he won't live another life burdened by infernal debts like the one in the previous world. Raquel starts to feel bad and asks the doctor what happened to his body. At that moment, the young man begins to tremble and feels weak all over. He then realizes his body is much weaker than someone in their 40s. The young man remembers that, in the first part of the Demon Sword Emperor story, Raquel, the Crown Prince, is a secondary character who appears only briefly and has been bedridden since he was young. Raquel dies at 22 in the original story. So the young man grows curious about his age and asks Dr. Garden how old he is this year. The doctor replies that he's 21, and the young man is shocked because that means he has only one more year to live. Raquel starts thinking about where things went wrong, and when he suddenly became a secondary character in a novel, he begins to think that he could forget the debts and live a comfortable life while having fun, since he is the crown prince. The young man feels sad because he has only 1 year left to live and adds that the crown prince receives the best medical treatments in this world. Rakiel starts thinking that the treatment didn't work even with the blessings of a clergyman countless times. He starts analyzing that Rakiel died in the first half of the story because he couldn't overcome his illnesses. At this moment, the young man realizes there's only one answer for him now, so he calls for Garden. Rakiel asks the doctor to bring needles, as he has something to do. Rakiel says the size of the needles doesn't matter, but he needs as many as possible. The young man sits up in bed and tries to feel his pulse in various ways because he doesn't understand what's wrong with his body. The technique the young man uses to measure the pulse is called 10 pulses of life. Even if one of them shows symptoms, the young man would be full of internal injuries. He gets upset and says that life is difficult. Afterward, Garden arrives with a sack full of needles. Garden says he followed his master's orders to bring as many needles as possible, and the young man asks him to place them where he's pointing. After unwrapping the cloth on the bed and seeing the needles, the young man picks one and heats it over a candle. Garden, not understanding what Rakiel is doing, asks what the young man plans to do with the needles. The young man replies that he intends to insert the needles into his own body. The doctor panics and grabs the young man's leg, saying that Rakiel is too young to kill himself. The doctor says that the young man is the one who will inherit the imperial throne, and then says he understands that Rakiel is in a lot of pain, but shouldn't harm himself this way. At this moment, the young man interrupts and says it's not what the doctor thinks. Rakiel says he's doing this for a good reason, and then he tells the doctor that once he inserts the needle into his body and nothing happens, the doctor will have to trust him from then on. After a while, the doctor finally gives up on trying to stop him and says he understands and will place his trust in Rakiel. After that, the young man takes off his shirt and says the doctor won't regret it. He decides to use the first needle on the most important respiratory organ. But before that, he needs to ensure that he can breathe properly before doing anything. To do this, the young man lies down on the bed and focuses on the starting point of the 12 meridians, the Taiyin lung meridian. Without wasting time, he picks up a needle and inserts it at the marked point, feeling pain. At this moment, the young man wonders if the pain he's feeling is because the needle is too big. He then continues to hit the other points. Suddenly, a status window appears, showing that the young man's body is reacting positively thanks to his acupuncture skills. The screen indicates that the functions of his internal organs have been slightly restored and that the lungs have started functioning properly again. After several happy lungs appear with positive signs, the young man receives 100 life points. As the young man lies with his hands raised, the doctor is confused. At this moment, the young man begins to understand what a status window is. The doctor starts to think the prince has gone mad, as he's acting very strangely. Rakiel lies down again and tells Garden that he's not crazy and asks the doctor to stop exaggerating. Garden asks if the young man is still going to continue with acupuncture, to which Rakiel replies that it's fine and starts inserting more needles into his own body. A screen shows that the young man performed acupuncture accurately at the Yunnan point, relieving the chest pressure. After that, the young man begins inserting needles into his arm, feeling pain from the procedure. Upon witnessing this, Dr. Garden starts praying, asking God to take care of the crown prince of the Magentano imperial family. The doctor then prays for him to be cured of his madness. Garden says the young man can't afford to get sick, and that, because of his poor mental state, he is harming himself. Garden says he's losing his mind and prays to God. Seeing this, the young man feels upset and pensive, but decides to continue with what he was doing. The young man punctures the points Xiaobai, Tianfu, Kunzul, and Yuji. After that, the status window opens again and informs that due to the young man's incredible acupuncture skills, several acupressure points are being stimulated. It's almost as if the young man's lungs are being massaged by a massage chair. The young man gets irritated and wonders why his lungs are being massaged like that. He then wonders why he hasn't gained any life points. Finally, the young man punctures the Chai's point, and the acupuncture treatment for his left lung is successfully completed. The status window opens once more and informs the young man that his lungs are dancing. The young man starts imagining this scene and feels annoyed because his mind is filled with noise. The status window then informs that the organ responsible for the movements of the intestines has now synchronized with the dancing lungs. Then, another figure appears in the young man's mind, a man with orange hair, asking the two men who represent the lungs why they left him out. The status window opens again and informs that the large intestine is in perfect synchronization with the rhythm, showing impressive wave-like movements. The young man remains confused by what the status is saying. Then, the status indicates that his large intestine has given him 100 life points. and his lungs have given him 200 life points, bringing his total to 600 life points. The young man begins to wonder how even his large intestine is involved now. The status window then informs him that he has reached the required HP level to unlock abilities, and the abilities he can unlock depend on what he is capable of doing. The status window asks the young man if he wants to see the list of unlockable abilities. At this moment, the young man imagines it might be like in video games, where swinging a sword releases a sword aura, or where he could shoot fire from a staff using a spell. He imagines it would be like fantasy abilities. So without wasting time, Rakiel presses yes to view the list of abilities. A list of 10 abilities appears, and their names are pulse reading, acupuncture, cupping therapy, moxibustion, herbal tonic preparation, herb identification, herb hunting, medicinal liquor preparation, medical fee requests, and Asrahan Manakor. The young man realizes these abilities are like those in the books he used to read for work, as everything starts with a diagnosis. After all, only a correct diagnosis leads to the right treatment and prescription. Without wasting time, the young man chooses the first skill shown, pulse reading, which is a level 1 skill. The status window indicates that the skill costs 500 GP, and now the young man only has 100 GP remaining. The status reveals that the young man's knowledge has unlocked a new skill. With pulse reading, the young man can roughly estimate his health condition and obtain results by checking a basic health report. The young man wonders what the basic health report is, so Rakiel decides to read his own pulse. At this moment, the status shows that it's starting the pulse reading and scanning, and the young man stays still with his eyes closed while the percentage progresses from 0% to 100%. After the analysis is complete, all the young man's information appears on the status screen, as if it were a full medical record. He is 21 years old, 1.76 meters tall, weighs 53 kilograms, and has blood type Rh+O. The total score for his 5 organs and 6 entrails is category F, and the overall opinion indicates that the young man is class SS trash with a life expectancy of 91 days. The young man feels frustrated, already imagining that he has only 3 months left to live. Rakiel's life seemed destined to be shorter than a cell phone contract. He lamented that his body was cursed, but declared with determination that he wouldn't die so easily. Resolute, the young man decided to rotate the needles embedded in his body clockwise, using the reinforcement reduction method. Simultaneously, he carefully released air as he removed the needles, employing the respiratory supplementation and drainage method. Afterward, the young man checks his status and sees that his life expectancy has increased to 92 days. He's surprised and realizes it worked, so he decides to try the other side. At this point, the young man starts coughing up blood, and the status indicates that Rakiel's body is experiencing stress due to frequent acupuncture. The status bar turns red and recommends that the young man only use the acupuncture technique once every 3 days. After seeing blood in his mouth, the young man realizes that acupuncture is not omnipotent. The image shows the figures representing his organs suffering from the excess acupuncture because the patient has to be resistant to nerve stimulation to endure acupuncture. However, the young man's health is now very low in game terms. A message appears stating that acupuncture works, but the problem is that the body is weak. The young man understands that he needs 3 days to be able to do acupuncture again. Upon further consideration, he realizes that if he does acupuncture every 3 days, he could extend his life expectancy by another month. Even so, death is still very near. So the young man needs something better, and the quickest way is to use consumables. This means using the tonic, so after hearing this, the doctor asks if the young man is okay. Quickly, the young man sits up and says he has a request for the doctor. The doctor says he's at the young man's disposal. Rakiel asks if they have more powerful ingredients in stock. The doctor doesn't understand what the young man means by more powerful ingredients. The young man clarifies that he's asking for poisonous ingredients. Garden confirms they have some. Rakiel asks if they have aconitine root in stock. After hearing this, Garden says they do, although it's not in the main palace. This is where the crown prince lives, so such items are kept in stock. Rakiel starts smiling and asks Garden to bring him one. Garden asks for forgiveness and wonders why the young man wants it. Rakiel makes a dark face and says he plans to eat the root. Garden is stunned by this request. Garden kneels and begs the prince not to do this. The doctor asks how the young man could ask him to help him poison himself with food. The young man says it's not like that, and the root is part of the treatment. Garden is still crying and confused, so the young man tells him that he has 5 minutes to bring the aconitine root. The young man threatens that if the doctor takes more than 5 minutes to bring it, he will kill himself. The doctor starts crying again. At this moment, the young man realizes he can't force things, so he explains that aconitine root is extremely poisonous. Garden acknowledges this, saying it's used in poisons. The young man explains that there are 2 types of these roots, and he plans to eat the smaller one, called the daughter root. Dr. Garden explains that aconitine in these plants stops the heart, but the young man says it's true, but he knows how to neutralize and control the poison. Rachiel explains that, in other words, he could turn this poisonous plant into a medicinal herb. At this moment, the doctor asks if the young man intends to transform the poison into a medicinal herb. The young man answers yes and says they call it detoxification elsewhere. The young man explains that after cleaning the daughter root, it can be used as medicine. Rachiel asks if the doctor is convinced now, and the doctor replies, "Not in a million years." The doctor says he has never heard of such a thing and therefore can't trust it. Garden says that if this can help the young man improve, he will go fetch the aconitine root as ordered. The young man becomes pensive. It's already night, and Garden walks toward the storage while holding a candle to light the way. Garden begins thinking that the prince's condition worsens daily, and because no medicine has worked, everyone is desperate. He considers that trying detoxification might be worth a shot. He also thinks that once the detoxification is over, he will take the medicine himself first to ensure it's safe. After that, Rachiel puts the roots in a pot with water to boil, and then Garden says that the smell coming from the pot is very strange. The young man asks if he wasn't convinced that it was safe. Garden replies that the young man is cooking a poisonous ingredient. After seeing the mixture in the pot, Garden joins his hands and starts crying again, asking the young man to reconsider. The young man is quickly shocked by Garden's attitude, but decides that he'll give him a scare too. The young man tells Garden to try it first since he's so worried, and the doctor says he'd love to do that. At this point, the young man is surprised and thoughtful because in the novel, Garden was definitely loyal and dedicated. Garden wasn't the main doctor from the beginning. He had started as the family doctor's assistant. Even the confident doctors left, and in the end, Garden was the only one who stayed by Rachiel's side. This is the kind of person Garden is. In the original story, Garden was blamed for the death of the crown prince and was executed. The young man realizes that Garden is a genuine person, and someone as nice as him deserves a good life. But the young man decides he's not going to share something so good with him. After the detoxification, the liquid is finally ready. Garden asks if he can drink it now, and the young man says that he understands he's eager, but they need to wait because the medicine needs to cool down before drinking. The doctor asks if it needs to cool first, then asks how the young man knows about such medicine. The young man gets nervous because Garden's loyalty is to Rachiel, and it would be a huge problem if the doctor found out that Rachiel was already someone else. At this moment, Rachiel plays dumb and says that a wizard told him about it while he was sleeping. Then the young man invents a bunch of stories, so the doctor stops asking more questions about it. With a disheartened look, Garden says he trusts the young man. When he sees Garden's face, the young man realizes that Garden was lying in his expression. Garden puts his hand on his face and says that he still thinks this medicine is really suspicious. When the doctor gets distracted for a few seconds, the young man quickly grabs the bowl with the medicine and drinks it all in one go. At that moment, the young man feels something in his heart, and the system informs that the young man has consumed the perfectly prepared ephedra aconitis decoction. The system informs that the daughter root removed the cold and the wounds from the young man and increased his metabolism. The status shows that the young man has awakened the Esrahan core, and the young man wonders what that core is. The Esrahan core is a technique created by the legendary swordsman master known as Javier Esrahan and the nobleman he served, Lloyd Frontra. This technique is only passed down by direct descendants of the Magentano imperial family. It's a powerful technique that symbolizes the imperial family. Since the original person in Rachiel's body is the crown prince, he must have learned about the Esrahan core when he was a kid. The system informs that the Esrahan core skill has been unlocked and is at the first circle, level 1. With this skill, it processes or enhances the mana absorbed by the circle around the heart, thus circulating the mana. The status shows that the young man's mana has increased by 120% and that he needs 1000 GP points to reach the next level, as he currently has only 100. The young man starts feeling like there's a slippery donut turning around in his heart. He also feels vitality spreading with every breath, and then a blue aura starts surrounding Rachiel's body, making him feel the flow of mana. At that moment, the young man gets excited. but suddenly feels like a circle is tightening around his heart as if it wants to explode. The bowl then falls from the young man's hand, and he starts grabbing his heart with both hands, as if he's in a lot of pain from the circle around his heart. The doctor gets worried and moves closer to Rachiel. Suddenly, the status window opens in red and starts beeping the alert because the mana circle is putting too much pressure on the young man's heart. Another message appears, indicating that the growth balance between the mana circle and the young man's heart is out of control. The system starts issuing warnings saying the young man's heart could stop at any moment. The young man starts wondering if the growth balance is out of control, and then wonders if this means that the size of his heart and the mana circle are incompatible. Rachiel has always been kind of frail since he was little, so he never had time to train his mana circle. The mana circle is like a ring that doesn't fit on his finger. The young man feels the circle tightening more and more around his heart. So he decides there's only one way to fix this. Since he can't shrink his heart, the only way is to increase the size of the mana circle. At that moment, the young man starts focusing and speeding up the rotations of the mana circle in his heart, letting it run free. The young man feels like he's about to faint, but this pain doesn't even compare to what he went through in Korea, because, from the rumors, his clinic had the virus and lost all its clients. The young man had started to go bald, not to mention the rents, loans, and accumulated interest. He even had to sell his own house to try to pay everything. So he gets mad when he remembers his beautiful house. The young man focuses on trying to make the circle expand so that his heart doesn't explode. After much effort, he manages to enlarge the circle, and the doctor starts crying with joy that the young man is okay. The system informs that thanks to the positive stimulation, the king of internal organs, the heart, is awake. Suddenly, the young man feels like his heart has come out of a locked cage, and he can finally see the light of the sun after all this time. At this moment, all the organs are happy with the heart's awakening and head toward it to see them. So the young man apologizes for having such a bad body. Of course, these representations are illusions in the young man's mind. A message on the status window shows that the balance between the heart and mana circle has been restored, and as a pioneer in history, the young man gets a mana slot. In the mana slot the young man has, the maximum capacity is 10L, but currently, it's empty. The young man is happy because a slot is like an inventory where he can store things. Without wasting any time, the young man gets up and starts smiling at Garden. At this point, the doctor realizes that the young man looks well and full of energy. The doctor says that before, the young man seemed like a zombie, and then Garden asks if this is a side effect of the medicine. The young man, pretending to be clueless, says that he just choked a little on the medicine. Rachiel says he just squeezed his neck a bit to clear the choke. Garden says it seemed like the young man had died, and then looks at the bowl, saying he should have drunk it a little earlier. Rachiel asks if Garden is really so eager to drink that poison. Then the young man says that next time, he'll let Garden drink it first. Garden looks at the young man with a tearful expression and says that's not what he meant. Rachiel says that if Garden doesn't want this to happen again, he should clean up the mess, because now the young man is going to rest. Then the young man smiles and thanks Garden. The doctor is surprised by what the young man just said, and then the young man tells Garden to forget what he heard. The young man starts thinking that if his calculations are correct, he might have gained some strong power. The mana slot is an ability that stores things interacting with mana. Each slot holds up to 10 liters, and so the young man could fill it by eating. He realizes that he can stock up by eating, so he decides to see if there's something he can test the slot with. After seeing a jar full of water, the young man realizes it will be the perfect test because the jar has 2 liters of water. He realizes that drinking 2 liters of water at once would be a medium lethal dose, as the substance becomes poisonous enough to kill half of the participants. Drinking that much water at once has a 50% chance of death. Even if he doesn't die, he'll suffer a lot or end up in a vegetative state. Given the average weight of 60 kilograms, a lethal dose would be about 5.4 liters. At this point, the young man calculates that with his current weight, a fatal dose would be around 3.9 liters. Rachiel gets scared while holding the jar of water and feels upset with his own body. After that, the young man starts drinking the water, and while observing the slot, he notices that he filled it with 1 liter and still doesn't feel full at all. After grabbing some jars, the young man drinks 9 more liters of water, totaling 10 liters. Even after filling the slot, the young man doesn't feel anything. So after taking 0.1 liters of water out, he finally feels like he's ingested something. The young man realizes that he has turned into a human camel, as he's able to store water inside his body to use whenever he wants. He understands how his ability works, so he starts thinking it would be a good idea to put a tonic in the soup. But he doesn't know what to do with the water. The young man would rather die than release the 10 liters of water stored in his body, so he starts wondering if there's another way. Looking at the jar, he decides to use his Asura core technique, since it's a technique of absorption, amplification, and discharge of mana. The young man decides to use the amplification and discharge of mana. Rakiel decides to discharge it out of his body, so using the mana amplification, Rakiel activates the discharge. After seeing the water start floating in his hand, the young man decides he'll slowly put it in a jar. But when he tries to place the water in the jar, he ends up exploding the jar with the pressure from the accumulated water in his mana. The young man doesn't understand, because that wasn't supposed to happen. Rakiel starts to realize that the water comes out of his hand like a faucet, but it looks more like a water cannon. Because of the explosion sound, the Imperial Guards, along with Garden, rush into the young man's room to see what happened. Garden asks if the young man is okay, because it looked like a terrorist attack, and then asks who would dare hurt his highness. Rakiel replies that that's not what happened and starts thinking about how he can explain it to them. Rakiel says that he got a bit mad and threw a jar of water at the table, which caused the noise, and then apologizes. At this moment, Garden and the guards think for a moment, and the young man wonders if they're going to believe him because it would be pretty stupid to believe. One of the guards says it's okay and asks if his highness didn't get hurt, and the young man replies that he didn't, just scratched a bit. Rakiel is surprised they believed his words. After this, the guards start cleaning the young man's room, and the leader of the guards asks Garden to take the young man to the second room. Garden says he'll take his highness after taking care of his injuries, and the young man starts thinking that this excuse was really weak. But it worked. Rakiel starts to wonder if they believed his words just because he's the crown prince. On the palace side, in the second room, the young man lies on a big bed covered with a blanket. Garden tells him to rest, and Rakiel starts thinking that this is one of the perks of being royalty. Then, the young man turns to Garden and asks him to rest too. The young man is happy about the day he had and starts thinking about the circle in his heart and the torrent of mana that flowed from his arm to his shoulder through the amplification and discharge. The result of the technique is impressive, but the young man is still full of energy and ready for more. The young man needs time to do more experiments once he understands what he's doing. At this moment, one of the soldiers heads towards the throne where Emperor Stellan Testarossa Magentano is to say that Prince Rakiel has been acting strangely lately. The soldier says the prince hurt himself with needles and has been acting differently. The next day, the young man prepares 10 liters of ephedra aconitisarm decoction. After that, the young man asks Garden to step outside for a minute, and Garden asks why. At this point, the young man thinks that if Garden sees him drinking the 10 liters of the liquid, he'll faint immediately. So, not wanting to say what he's about to do, the young man says it's quick and that he needs to do something alone. Garden looks at Rakiel suspiciously and asks if he's going to drink the liquid again. Garden says the young man got sick from drinking the decoction last time, and the young man says he just choked. Garden says he's worried because this time they made a whole bucket of that poison. Rakiel says it's an experiment and that he'll only take a sip, then says he doesn't want to waste the effort it took to make it. Garden puts his hand on his head and starts smiling, then says it's not like he can drink all the liquid. Garden says only a madman would think that, and then they both start laughing. Seeing Garden keep laughing and staying nearby, the young man starts kicking him out of the kitchen, telling him to leave. After kicking the doctor out and closing the kitchen door, the young man heads toward the big pot of liquid. The young man decides to drink it all, but quickly realizes the pot is heavy. After drinking all 10 liters of the tonic, the young man decides to release a little at a time. So, he releases only 0.1 liters of the tonic. The young man releases the liquid 0.1 liters at a time, then goes to the bathroom and later goes to sleep. A notification appears saying that the young man's heart is loving it, and Rakiel receives 100 more HP points, his lungs are dancing, and he gains 200 more HP points. The notification says the young man's large intestine is jumping with his sphincter, adding another 100 GP points to the total. When looking at the status window, the young man sees that he now has 500 total HP, but it still isn't enough. The young man decides that he needs to increase his life expectancy. His organs start to argue because they're tired of consuming the same tonic every day, and they want something new. So the young man gets a notification saying he needs to consume other things. After that, the young man releases 0.1 liters of tonic multiple times, then heads to the hall to have lunch. A notification pops up saying that Rakiel has gained 50 more days of life, and his life expectancy is now 133 days. Seeing the message, the young man gets very happy, stands up from his chair, and yells that it worked, scaring the maid, who drops the coffee cup she was carrying on a tray. The young man apologizes for startling the maid. The maid gets teary-eyed, lowers her head, and apologizes to the young man. So the young man wonders why she's apologizing just for breaking a coffee cup. Raquel asks if the maid is okay and if she didn't hurt herself. The maid apologizes and says she won't do it again, then asks the young man not to whip her like last time. Raquel starts laughing, even though he's nervous inside, then asks if he ever whipped her. The young man hopes the maid says no, and she replies that he didn't. At that moment, the young man feels relieved. Then the maid says that the young man never whipped her personally. The young man asks if he had ever sent someone to whip her. Raquel asks what she did to deserve this punishment, and the maid answers that she spilled a drop of water on her sleeve. At this moment, the young man starts thinking that the crown prince was a monster. Raquel says he understands and tells the maid to clean up the mess and leave. Hearing this, she gets happy and thanks the young man, calling him Your Highness. After seeing the girl run, the young man notices that she ran like she was escaping from prison. At this moment, the young man calls for Dr. Garden, and Garden quickly appears in front of him. Raquel says his memory is still fuzzy and asks for Garden's help, then asks what figure he is to them and to the servants. Noticing that Garden is stalling, the young man says that if the doctor starts with flattery, he'll drink all the poison. Garden gets startled and, realizing there's no other way, says that Raquel acts like an emperor, not tolerating any mistakes from his servants and treating them with superiority. Raquel starts thinking about why the servants believed his absurd story about the explosion noise, as Raquel has been crazy from the start. Raquel asks the doctor why he isn't afraid. Since being the closest, he must have suffered the worst. Garden says it's because he trusts the young man, so the young man asks if Garden trusts him. Garden says he knows what kind of person the young man truly is. At this moment, scenes from Raquel's past appear, showing him under a tree while it rained, holding a bird in his hands to protect it from the rain. This scene was witnessed by Garden, and then the doctor says that he believes that by curing the young man's illness, the real kind prince will return. Garden says his trust in the young man has been proven right. At this moment, the young man smiles and thanks the doctor. Raquel calls him an idiot and asks if the doctor is enjoying the change, and then Garden responds that of course he is. Raquel says he'll reward Garden for this. And then the young man tells Garden to eat the cake on the table. Garden feels unsure about it, but the young man insists he eat it. The young man decides to swear by Li Han, but then realizes that in this world, his name is different. So he swears by the name of Raquel Adria Magentano that he won't let the doctor take the blame for his death, and that he will survive. Suddenly, one of the servants bursts through the door and calls for the young man. The doctor almost chokes on the whole cake in his mouth. The servant says His Highness called. After putting on his prince's uniform, the young man heads to where his father is. Once near His Majesty, the young man bows and pays respect to the master of this land. Emperor Estellan Testarossa Magentano looks at the young man and is surprised to see that his son has awakened the Israhan core technique. The emperor can't believe his fragile son Raquel has awakened this. At that moment, the young man starts thinking he acted wrongly because the emperor is pretty upset. Then he thinks he drifted off a bit for a moment. Raquel starts to feel his legs tingling and waits for the emperor to say something so he can get out of the bowing position. The emperor asks if the young man is enjoying living in the Annex Palace, and the young man replies that he is, referring to his father as Majesty. Raquel starts thinking that he'll have to talk to his father while kneeling. Then the emperor says he heard that the young man had hurt himself with needles and drank poison, then asks if that's true. Raquel looks at the emperor and says it's not true. Then the emperor gets serious and calls him a fool, asking how the young man could consider himself the heir to this imperial family. The emperor says Raquel is from the proud lineage of the imperial family, a member of it, and can't just throw away his pride and dignity. The young man becomes thoughtful, and then the emperor says that if Raquel couldn't bear the weight of the crown because of his health, it would be wiser to make a more sensible decision. At that moment, the young man starts wondering what the emperor meant by a wise decision, then begins to think that he was called here for a specific reason. The emperor says he'll get straight to the point, then tells Raquel that he wants him to abdicate his position as the crown prince and give it to his brother, the second prince. At that moment, the young man begins to understand, thinking the emperor was talking about something else. Raquel smiles and apologizes to His Majesty, then gets up and says he refuses to do that. After hearing this, the king gets angry at what the young man just said, then asks how Rakiel dares refuse. Rakiel replies that yes, he dares, and then starts thinking that the pressure is intense. But there's no reason to be scared. Rakiel understands why the king is acting this way, because from the start, the emperor didn't need his consent to give away his position. The reason the king is doing this is because he wants Rakiel to give up his title and recognize his own brother. Another reason is to have a son who truly deserves the title of his older brother. The young man starts thinking that this is actually a pretty good political move, because even though Rakiel is frail and unreliable, he won't die without a fight. After observing the king's expression, the young man realizes he's really nervous. The king asks if the young man doesn't realize that he's being kind, then asks if the position of crown prince really means that much to him. The king asks if Rakiel only wants to shame him and the royal family. At this point, the young man realizes that he doesn't care about the title and would love to hand it over to the second prince or anyone else just to enjoy life. But the young man understands that things aren't that simple. If he accepts this proposal, the country will fall apart. Everything will collapse because of the second prince. In the game, the Demon Sword Emperor, the second prince is seen by others as hard-working and competent, but an era of chaos is about to begin. The second prince is a frustrated regent who can't handle the era of chaos. So, if the second prince becomes emperor, the empire and the imperial family will fall. The young man decides he'll do everything in his power to stop that from happening. The young man says he's sick and fragile, but his intelligence and wisdom remain strong. Then says that the title of crown prince doesn't matter. What's important is the prosperity and peace of the imperial family. The king looks directly into the young man's eyes and says that those are beautiful words. The young man says they're not just beautiful words, because he has a proposal for the emperor. At this moment, the king becomes curious and asks what proposal that would be. Rakiel asks for a chance from the king to prove who, between him and the second prince, is more capable of bearing the weight of the crown. After that, they talk a bit more, and the young man leaves the emperor's presence. When he returns to his room, Garden asks why the majesty called for him. Rakiel says it was nothing, and that the king just wanted him to give up the crown prince title to the second prince. Garden starts getting shocked, and then Rakiel tells him to relax, saying that he refused. Rakiel adds that he even suggested a sword duel with the second prince. At that moment, the young man notices that Garden is acting strangely and asks what he's doing. Garden starts packing things in his suitcase and says he's getting ready to leave. Rakiel gets angry at the doctor's attitude, and then we see the scene of the king in his office. The king starts thinking that Rakiel wants a chance to prove he's more deserving than the second prince. At that moment, the king wonders if the young man really has that side to him, then decides to accept the proposal and starts getting excited. After seeing Garden leaving, the young man quickly pulls him back by the suitcase handle and says he'll win the duel. Garden pulls the handle back and asks how Rakiel plans to win. The next day, the king is finishing organizing the duel between the two princes to decide who's more worthy of the title of crown prince. Many important people and guests are present to watch such an important duel. Some girls in the stands are blushing as they cheer for Prince Theodore. Then they're amazed by the second prince's looks and imagine how incredible Theodore's victory will be. The two princes are now face to face, and the young man starts doing some stretches for the duel. Theodore turns to his brother and says it's unnecessary, then says that Rakiel already knows who will win the fight between them. The young man takes a deep breath and asks if Theodore is saying he'll win the duel. Theodore says the Majesty said Rakiel suggested this duel to pass the title of crown prince to his own brother. At that moment, the young man gets suspicious because that's not true. Theodore says that Rakiel should already know that the result will be the same, then says he doesn't want the young man to sacrifice his life for this. Theodore says he won't let that happen, and the young man doesn't need to strain himself for him. The young man starts thinking that the king and his brother are out of their minds. After that, Garden brings a steel shield for the young man. After putting it on his arm, the young man says he doesn't plan to lose. At this point, people around start commenting that the young man is a bit weird, as he wouldn't have any chance of winning. One person comments that the second prince, besides having an Asrahan core, also learned fencing from a famous knight. Garden turns his gaze to the young man holding the shield, doubting his chances of victory and assuming he must be joking. The memory of their earlier conversation comes back to him. Garden had asked if this was some kind of joke, but Rakiel had replied with unwavering seriousness, declaring that he fully intended to win. The young man tells Garden to relax, saying no one expects much from Rakiel, so the pressure will be much lower. Garden starts sweating and says he's sure the young man will win. Then Rakiel looks at the doctor and asks why he's lying so blatantly. The young man had said that if he could withstand 3 attacks from the second prince, he would win. At this moment, Garden closes his eyes and starts rooting for the young man. The king announces to everyone present that today's fight will determine who is worthy of ascending to the throne. The king explains the rules clearly. If the crown prince can remain standing for more than 5 minutes or manage to defeat the second prince, Rachiel will be declared the winner. However, if he fails to meet either of these conditions, the victory will go to Theodore. Theodore is confident because, since this is the only way, the best move is to finish the fight as quickly as possible. The king announces the fight has begun, and both princes assume their combat positions. Suddenly, the young man throws the sword he was holding on the ground. At that moment, people around start thinking that the young man gave up on the fight really quickly, and it looks like a horrible scene. Theodore asks if the young man has given up, then starts thinking that this is good because he feels sorry about attacking someone who's sick. Theodore can't believe that the young man would give up the fight so easily, especially in front of such a large crowd, because it would be a disgrace to the royal family. Theodore wonders if he should motivate his brother, since his father is watching the fight. But still, this outcome would be the best, since the young man is sick. At this moment, the young man picks up the steel shield, which has a small visor part, and holds it with both hands. Theodore starts wondering if the young man just plans to defend the attacks instead of attacking. Theodore begins to think that the young man is focusing on prolonging the fight for more than 5 minutes to win, instead of defeating him. Theodore begins to smile and thinks that his brother is brave, so he plans to end the fight quickly. Theodore begins concentrating the mana in his heart to flow throughout his body, thus gaining more power to attack the young man with all his might using his sword. Without wasting time, Theodore charges at Rachiel, and the king starts thinking that the shield won't be able to withstand the strong attack imbued with mana. Quickly, Rachiel concentrates the mana from his core and flows it through his body to hold the shield firmly to block the attack. Because of the pressure from Theodore's attack, the young man starts tilting his body. Theodore thinks the young man is just playing the fool, as he'll lose the fight by falling to the ground instead of losing with dignity. Even though the attack is coming from above, the young man easily blocks it, leaving Theodore confused and surprised. The audience is surprised that the young man was able to defend the attack, but quickly thinks that Theodore is taking it easy on his brother and showing kindness. Theodore analyzes the situation and realizes this defense wasn't a coincidence, but still, it won't change anything. Theodore grips his sword tightly with both hands and increases his mana concentration, then attacks again to try to break the young man's shield. The pressure from the attack is so strong that the young man is thrown back despite holding onto the shield. Garden is worried, but the young man manages to plant his feet back on the ground. At this moment, the young man feels confused and starts to feel his wrist tingling. But even so, in his past life, he had already endured quite a bit when he was a police officer. Focusing his mana again, the young man attacks while making a lunge with the shield. Theodore tries to cut the shield with his sword, but the attack just grazes it. Rachiel starts thinking that the shield absorbs mana much better than he imagined, so that will work even better. Theodore says he doesn't know what the young man is up to and claims the duel is over. After that, Theodore jumps high and attacks the young man's shield with all his strength. Then Rachiel adjusts the position of her legs to better anchor herself to the ground and withstand the impact. The young man's organs are working hard, as they are tirelessly keeping him firm. He remembers the personalized shield made by the royal blacksmith and the explosive potion he made for his brother. At this moment, upon receiving his brother's attack, Rachiel activates the slot 1 flush and asks to discharge 0.2 liters. After receiving Rachiel's attack, Theodore begins to feel strange, as if he were drunk and having difficulty standing, surprising everyone in the audience with what they are witnessing. Theodore doesn't understand what's happening. So the young man remembers what was written in The Demon Sword Emperor, that someone like Theodore can't handle even a small glass of wine. The young man thinks it was a good idea to fill the slot with an explosive cocktail containing 20 types of strong drinks the night before. Theodore starts thinking that he's sure he hit the shield with enough force, but still feels like something with mana invaded his body. At this moment, Theodore decides to regain composure, but the result doesn't change. Theodore is determined to defeat his brother in less than 5 minutes to win the duel. Theodore wants to earn his father's recognition and the applause of thousands of citizens in the capital, and rise again as the proud crown prince. Theodore decides that this is the best for the imperial family, for the empire, and for his brother, whose health is deteriorating. Rachiel starts wondering if his plan worked. Then his brother starts staring at him again and says he'll win. Theodore prepares to advance again towards the young man, and Rachiel is surprised that his brother withstood the explosive cocktail. After defending Theodore's attack using the shield, the young man decides to give his brother a second dose of the explosive cocktail. The young man discharges 0.1 liters of the explosive cocktail stored to send it directly into his brother's body. At this moment, Theodore starts hallucinating that he's in a bar, and his brother is buying him a drink. Then, when he wakes up from this hallucination, Theodore is confused. Quickly, the young man throws his shield on the ground and prepares to bring his brother back to reality. After charging his mana, the young man uses his skill to expel the liquid stored in the slot towards his brother. After getting close to Theodore, the young man releases his skill, throwing his brother several meters back. Everyone in the audience is stunned, as they can't believe what they're seeing. The king realizes that Rachiel used an Esrahan core technique. The king starts thinking he was wrong, as despite the abundance of energy from the people around and being far away, he could feel the circle resonating strongly. After knocking his brother down, the young man approaches Theodore and begins massaging his left foot. Theodore is confused. Then the young man says he's purifying the impure mana. At this moment, Theodore realizes it's an Esrahan core technique and is shocked. The young man starts thinking it's a normal technique. Then after Theodore sees his sword on the ground, far from his body, Theodore admits that he lost the duel. The young man ignores this, and Theodore asks if his brother doesn't believe he won. Rachiel says he can't believe he won. Then Theodore notices that the young man's forehead is bleeding and quickly warns him. Rachiel says he thinks he hits his head on the shield when blocking the attacks. Theodore starts realizing how much his brother struggled in this fight, because while his brother was giving his all with his frail body, Theodore had been arrogant, as if the victory was already in his hands. Rachiel asks his brother how he is feeling, and Theodore replies that he is very embarrassed. Rachiel says that he means his body, then asks his brother if he has hurt himself. Theodore says that he is feeling much better now. The young man asks if he's really fine, then starts thinking that of course, his brother is fine, because the young man had drained all the alcohol from his body. At this moment, Theodore bows to him and announces to everyone that he recognizes his defeat in the duel against Crown Prince Rachiel in front of his majesty and the citizens. The entire audience erupts into cheers for Rachiel's victory as the young man raises his hands triumphantly, declaring that he did it. Garden begins wiping away his tears, moved by the sight of Rachiel's happiness, knowing that moments like this are rare and precious. Suddenly, the status window opens, informing the young man that he has successfully treated someone other than himself for the first time. Then, a new skill is unlocked for achieving such a great accomplishment. The new skill is called Medical Life Preservation, Level 1. The status shows that the young man's own life expectancy increases when he prolongs the life of the patients he treats. The current conversion rate is 2,000 for 1. After receiving this skill, the young man is very happy. The system informs that the new skill has just been activated, and Theodore's life expectancy has been increased by 0.5 days. Then, the system informs that the young man's life expectancy is still very minimal, with an increase of only 1 day. The young man thinks this is annoying and says he got his hopes up for nothing. At this moment, the young man realizes that every time he treats a patient, both his and their life expectancy will increase. No matter how much tonic the young man drinks or how much acupuncture he does, the feeling is like throwing water into a broken vase. Rachiel starts smiling because now it's different. Then the king asks why the young man is so quiet. Again, the king asks the young man if he used the Esrahan core technique in the fight, and the young man replies that yes. Not understanding how the young man managed to use this technique, the king asks how the young man knows it. Rachiel says he doesn't really know, and the king asks how he doesn't know. Rachiel says he doesn't know, since how could he tell the king that he gained the skill by pricking himself with needles? The king says he engraved the core skill in the young man's heart at birth. The young man thanks him. Then the king says the young man couldn't use the technique because he has a sick body. Rachiel apologizes to the king for having a sick body, and the king says the young man managed to overcome this crisis despite his sick body and when it was most needed. Rachiel thanks the king again, and the king says this messed up his plan and his effort. Again, the young man apologizes to the king for this, then begins to think if the king is praising him or scolding him. Then the king says that a promise is a promise, so the fight is over. The king says that the young man won the fight and the bet, so he will remain the crown prince. Before leaving, the king looks at the young man and says that he will observe him and test the young man's ability to bear the weight of the crown. The young man stays thoughtful and doesn't answer anything. Then the king gets irritated and asks why the young man isn't answering his question. The young man says he heard the king no longer picks up his sword and only deals with kingdom affairs. Then the young man tells the king not to do that because he needs to move his skeleton, maintain his endurance, and stretch his stiff muscles. Rakiel says his father also needs to increase his intake of vegetables and consider quitting smoking. At that moment, the king stares at the young man and asks who he thinks he is to give him advice. Then Rakiel responds that he's just saying it out of concern. After that, the king continues his journey in a carriage. Thinking about what his son said, the king starts talking to himself, saying the young man avoided his warning with insincere requests, and even dodged the question about the Asrahan core technique. The king can't believe that the young man used such a powerful technique as the Asrahan core despite having a sick body, because it could have side effects. The king starts thinking that the young man was desperate because he lost his mother during birth and has always been sick. The king thinks he created expectations in the young man many times, only to be disappointed each time. But the glimmer of hope the young man showed today once again shook the king's heart. During his return home, the young man starts thinking about his late father from the previous world who died of a stroke. The young man remembers the time he skipped school to play, then got a call and rushed to the hospital, but arrived too late. The young man remembers that the Emperor will collapse from a stroke after Rakiel's death in the first half of The Demon Sword Emperor. The young man decides that he won't let this happen because the king needs to stay healthy to protect his throne, and this way, he'll be able to increase his own life expectancy with a medical preservation. He's determined not to go through this experience again. Suddenly, inside the carriage, Garden screams while calling the young man, "Your Majesty," which startles Rakiel. Garden asks the young man why he's crying. Not understanding anything, Rakiel asks Garden why he's crying, and Garden responds that he's very emotional. Garden says it must have been difficult and exhausting for the young man, and Rakiel thanks him for his concern, saying he's going to rest now because they'll have a lot to do tomorrow. Rakiel starts pushing the doctor away as the doctor asks what they will do the next day. Rakiel says he needs to find someone. After arriving at Sorrentino Garden and sitting at a table, the young man says that it's one of the 10 most famous restaurants in the capital. He asks Garden if he knows it, and Garden answers yes, since he's a regular customer. Then, noticing the young man in a bow tie, suit, and a blonde wig, Garden asks why the young man changed his clothes. At that moment, a waiter arrives and asks if he can take their orders. The young man says he wants a pasta with sauce, a separate pasta, and a salad with no vegetables. After that, the young man asks for a wine that isn't made with grapes and says he plans to eat until the sun rises. Garden is confused, and the waiter asks the young man to follow him. At that moment, Garden leans in close to the young man's ear and asks what kind of orders those are. The young man tells him to follow him, and he'll understand what's going on. After walking a bit toward the kitchen and near a door with stairs, where wines are stored beside it, the waiter asks them to go down the stairs. Garden wonders if there's a place like this in a restaurant, and also wonders how the young man knew about it. The young man begins descending the stairs, feeling relieved, as it's just like in the novel. Then Garden asks where they are and why they're here. Rakiel responds that he's going to collect some expensive treatment fees. Garden still doesn't get it, so Rakiel says he's meeting someone. The young man asks Garden if he's heard of Damien, and Garden replies no. The young man says that's normal. Then after finishing descending the stairs, Rakiel finds a closed door and quickly opens it. The place ahead looks like a coliseum where people face off, and the audience places bets. Garden asks what this place is, and the young man smiles and says it's a secret location. After looking around for a while, Garden is surprised and asks if the strong man in the arena is Damien. Rakiel says that's not him. After a while, a fully equipped man walks out of one of the gates on the arena side and heads to the center. The young man says that's Damien. The man is carrying a blood-stained sword in its scabbard, and this man is the real protagonist of the story. Damien Kine faces off against the muscular man, and at that moment, the crowd starts shouting Damien's name. Seeing the muscular man sweating and clearly nervous, the referee says that if he's already done here, he should leave. The muscular man exits the arena. The referee announces that the main fight of the day will be between the demon-talented swordsman genius, Damien Kine, who debuted in the Coliseum at 17 and became champion in just 3 months, leaving everyone in the dust. The referee continues by saying that Damien's opponent today will be a beast, and at that moment, a giant troll starts walking toward the challenger. Upon seeing the furious monster, the young man gets scared and starts feeling a heavy pressure. Garden begins trembling and asks again what this place is and what's going on. At this point, Garden starts to think they're feeding trolls with humans, and suddenly the troll charges into the fight. Damien dodges, and the first strike hits the ground. Frustrated with his opponent's speed, the troll starts a series of attacks with his fists, but Damien easily evades them all. Bored by the monotony, Damien decides to end the fight by drawing his sword and slicing the troll in half with one blow. The blade of Damien's sword cuts through the troll's head and continues down until the body is completely severed. At that moment, the crowd is stunned and begins to shout and cheer for Damien. Rakiel is astonished because Damien is more of a monster than the actual monster he just faced. The young man realizes that's why Damien is the protagonist of this story. Damien is someone compared to Javier, a master known as the strongest swordsman in history, a genius with the sword. Then, the young man tells Garden to stay alert and follow him. When they get close to the room where Damien is, a security guard stands at the door. As they approach the guard, the young man is immediately given an invitation to leave. Without wasting time, the young man hands the guard a gold bar, and the guard quickly changes his mind and lets them enter. Once inside, the young man finds Damien sitting at a table, wiping his face. On the table, there's a jar of pills and his sword. Without hesitation, the young man enters and greets Damien, but the man looks at him seriously, making the young man start trembling. Rakiel decides to stay composed and shake off his nervousness. The young man picks up the medicine jar from the table and says he's sorry for Damien, asking why he's taking such cheap painkillers. Rakiel asks if Damien can even sleep after taking something like that. Damien looks at him intently and asks his name. The young man says he's someone Damien needs. Damien asks if the young man came to sell him medicine, and Rakiel answers that it's something like that. Damien tells the young man to leave, saying he already has enough medicine. At that moment, the young man throws the jar of medicine on the ground and asks why Damien has such terrible painkillers. Damien gets angry and starts grabbing the sword on the table, but the young man tells him that he won't get rid of his headache with those cheap painkillers. Damien is surprised, and the young man realizes he's gotten his attention and quickly prepares for the show. Rakiel arranges the human body on a diagram and asks Damien to pay attention. Then the young man says that pain usually starts at the back of the head. Rakiel says the back of the neck and head get stiff, and that's where the pain starts. Then, he asks if the areas around the back of the head and shoulders feel tight. At that moment, the young man starts pressing Damien's shoulders and asks what's going on in those eyes. Rakiel leans into Damien's ear and says that he must be wondering how the young man knows all of this. Then, Rakiel says that the pain spreads to the sides of the head, forehead, and even between the eyes, which is why Damien feels chills and starts sweating like crazy. The young man says the eyes start to hurt so much that it feels like they're about to pop out. He says the funny thing is that the pain comes in waves, then calms down and repeats the cycle, driving people crazy. The young man says it feels like hell where it seems like it's ending, but the torture doesn't stop. He continues by saying that instead of getting rid of the source of the pain, Damien has been relying on cheap painkillers. Rakiel asks if Damien thinks painkillers are the solution, then answers his own question, saying they're not. At that moment, Damien's ears start to bleed, and a murderous urge toward the young man arises in his mind because the young man talks too much. Rakiel asks if Damien doesn't have a mouth, then tells him to say something before calling him a fool. Damien begins to think that the young man didn't give him a chance to speak, since he wouldn't stop talking. Damien asks again who the young man is, and Rakiel introduces himself as the Crown Prince. Upon hearing this, Damien draws his sword and tells the young man to die. The young man tells him to wait, saying he was joking, as it was actually Kuzmin who sent him. Damien asks if Kuzmin sent the young man, and Rakiel says yes. Kuzmin is the promoter and intermediary at Damien's Coliseum. The young man says Kuzmin has been complaining about the lack of medicine these days. Rakiel says that Kuzmin has been having difficulties as an intermediary, as no one has enough ingredients this season. After hearing this, Damien is confused, and the young man says there's another way to help relieve his pain. Rakiel wonders if he has managed to convey confidence in his words. Then Damien asks if the young man has brought a new medicine. The young man says this pain isn't something that can be treated with medicine, and it has to be cut at the root. After saying that, the young man asks Damien to take his shirt off and lie down. Rakiel says she will explain the process while she does the treatment, and Damien agrees, taking off his shirt. As Damien lies down on the bed, a small sword tattoo on his back becomes visible. Rakiel asks if Damien is scared, and Damien says he is not. Damien says he's a warrior. At that moment, the young man realizes that Damien is a warrior who has cut people, gotten hurt, and risked his life countless times. Suddenly, the young man picks up a medium-sized stone and places it on the man's back. Damien looks confused, and the young man, holding a torch, asks if this is Damien's first time seeing moxibustion. Damien says he is a warrior, so this type of treatment does not scare him. At that moment, the young man sets the stone on fire using the torch. The guard outside is startled by Damien's scream. Seeing that Damien has started trembling, the young man seizes the moment to mock him, saying that just a moment ago, the man was bragging about being a warrior. At this moment, the young man understands that the reason Damien can't leave this underground world is because of the mark on his back. The curse of the mark activates when the blood begins to circulate, so when Damien goes through a tough fight in the Colosseum, he will feel extreme pain. To ease this pain, Damien bought painkillers with the money he borrowed from Kuzmin. Damien gets into fights to pay off his debts, and so the fight and the drugs become a never-ending cycle for him. The young man realizes that Kuzmin is a scoundrel and decides to explain what he is doing. Rakiel is using the hellish heat to burn the mark first, because if he heals the protagonist, the strongest man in the novel, he can gain extra lives by keeping the protagonist by his side. Rakiel thinks it would also be a good idea to heal the other gladiators. After a while, the young man tells Damien that the treatment is over and asks him to get up. Seeing that the mark has burned and left a red spot on Damien's back, the young man asks him how he is feeling. Rakiel asks Damien if he's feeling better, with no pain and much lighter. Damien starts feeling his body and realizes he's feeling better and rejuvenated. So he starts smiling and says he hasn't felt this good in a long time. The young man explains that the treatment isn't over yet, and that Damien isn't fully healed. Unintentionally, the young man says he'll need more burns, but quickly corrects himself and says the treatment will continue. Rakiel tells Damien not to pop the blisters on his back if they appear. Rakiel tells Damien not to exert himself until his body stabilizes and to avoid fatty foods. Damien is confused by the part where the young man told him not to exert himself, so annoyed. The young man tells Damien not to struggle. At that moment, Damien gets upset and says Kuzmin won't let that happen. The young man tells Damien not to worry, as he'll take care of everything. After hearing this, Damien calms down and starts to see the sparkle in the young man's eyes, then asks the young man's name. The young man says he already introduced himself and that he's the crown prince. Not believing the young man's words, Damien says the young man must have his own reasons for not revealing his identity. The young man doesn't understand why Damien doesn't believe him. So Rakiel tells Damien to do everything he says from now on. Rakiel says that tonight, no matter what happens in the Colosseum, Damien must stay in his room and not leave. Damien is confused, and the young man tells him not to doubt his words. Rakiel says Damien will be safer in his room. Rakiel says that this is the only way he will find Damien again. After that, Damien bows to him and says he understands what the young man said. The young man then leaves the room and meets up with Garden, who asks why the young man sought out this man for such a strange treatment. Garden says this place doesn't seem nice or safe, and then he says he didn't understand anything that happened there. Rakiel says he'll understand later, and that now they need to do what needs to be done. Rakiel asks Garden to help him. Garden doesn't understand what they need to do, so Rakiel asks the doctor to look for a man with black hair and a ponytail. Rakiel describes the man as being large with slanted eyes. After searching everywhere, Garden finally finds a man who matches the description the young man gave. Garden says he found the man, and the young man looks to see if it matches the description. The man is sitting at a table, drinking a large mug of beer. Seeing that the man looks like the one he's been looking for, the young man decides to confirm. Rakiel sits at the table where the man is and asks if his name is Kuzmin. The man replies that he does not know. The young man asks if the man knows who Damien is, then says that he wants to buy Damien Kyan. The man ponders for a moment, and then the young man asks how much he would need to pay to settle Damien's debts for the painkillers and breach of contract. The man starts laughing and says the amount is 9 trillion margins. He says that anything less than that is impossible, and only the crown prince could afford such an amount. The man laughs at the young man, and Rakiel says everything is fine, as he is the crown prince. At that moment, the man laughs even harder and says that if the young man is the crown prince, then he is too. The young man asks if he's the crown prince who sells medicine. The man says that if the young man isn't there to buy, he should leave. The man thinks for a moment. Then the young man gets up and leaves the table. Kuzmin tells one of his subordinates to come closer, then tells the subordinate to find out who the skinny guy trying to make jokes is. Kuzmin tells the subordinate to check if the young man works in the Colosseum or if he's hired by others, and if needed, to torture and interrogate him. Kuzmin tells him to dismember the young man and throw his body in the river, as they always do. An hour later, the subordinate returns to Kuzmin and falls to the ground next to him, severely injured. Kuzmin is confused, not understanding what happened to Dalik, the subordinate he sent to spy on and kill the young man. At that moment, the young man, along with his knights, enters the room where Kuzmin is. Seeing that Kuzmin is starting to get scared, the young man removes the blonde wig he was wearing and reveals the imperial family crest. After this, the knights announce that the secret royal inspector has arrived. Then the scene from an hour earlier is shown. After leaving the restaurant, the young man and Garden went for a walk. Rakiel tells Garden to relax during the walk because he's giving himself away too much. Garden laughs and says he's never been followed before. At this moment, the young man realizes what's going on. As soon as Kuzmin feels threatened, he'll send one of his goons to follow whoever is bothering him. The young man approached Kuzmin on purpose, knowing the man would act this way. The thug was planning to stab the young man while following him, but when he tried to act, he ran into the royal knights and ended up getting surrounded. The leader of the knights says that the thug's crime was attempting to assassinate someone of royal blood. After that, we return to the scene where the young man invades Kuzmin's room with the royal knights. Garden asks what the young man meant by secret royal inspector, and the young man says it's nothing, even though he's always wanted to say that at least once in his life. The young man says that the knight commander did well, then returns the coat of arms he was holding to the knight. Kuzmin does not understand what is happening, as he did not expect this situation. Kuzmin begins to wonder what the royal guard is doing here. Rakiel introduces himself to everyone around as the crown prince and orders all the knights to destroy the place. Then, Rakiel orders them not to let Kuzmin escape. The knights accept the young man's orders and set off to carry them out. Then Garden notices that things are happening exactly as the young man said. Garden realizes that the young man is quite different from what he usually is, because now he's even subjugating underground organizations like this and taking care of the kingdom's security. At that moment, all the people in the place are being arrested, and the young man deduces that he's going to get a lot of extra life points. Kuzmin, the crown prince who sells medicine, is hiding, while the knights are turning the place upside down looking for him. Kuzmin starts running, taking advantage of the blind spots in the place, because if he's caught, he'll be stuck in prison for a long time. Kuzmin can't believe that the young man is the real crown prince, so he starts to wonder why the young man wants to buy Damien. Kuzmin doesn't understand any of this, so he starts to run, looking for a place to hide until the situation calms down. Suddenly, the young man, along with the royal knights, finds Kuzmin. The young man says he knew Kuzmin would run this way. Garden hands the young man 500 margins, as they had bet if the young man could guess Kuzmin's location. Kuzmin is confused, and the young man says it's all a huge mess for him, and that he won't be able to understand no matter how much he tries. The young man says paying for medicine is a serious matter, and Kuzmin asks what the young man means by that. Rakiel says he hates it when people don't pay for their medicine, just as he hates it when they do it to him. Then Rakiel says he hates doing it to others too. Kuzmin still doesn't get it, so the young man says that's why he asked the price of Damien's painkillers. Rakiel says he asked how much Damien owed and how much needed to be paid. Then the young man asks if Kuzmin doesn't remember. The young man says the agreement he proposed was made in good faith, but Kuzmin decided to throw it all away. Kuzmin tells the young man to shut up and quickly pulls 2 knives to try to kill the crown prince. One of the knights delivers a strong punch to Kuzmin's face, knocking him to the ground. The young man starts laughing while mocking the fallen man. The knight tells Kuzmin to stay down, and seeing that it's come to this, Kuzmin grabs a pill capsule that's a mini bomb that will explode 5 seconds after being triggered. The explosion will cause chaos with poison, and paralysis will activate as soon as someone breathes the poison. Kuzmin knows that this poison can also kill those who breathe it, so he plans to spit out the capsule and crawl away to escape. Kuzmin decides that before fleeing, he'll take advantage of the chaos to cut off the crown prince's head. Kuzmin starts smiling and decides it's a perfect plan, then starts counting the time in his mind. Quickly, the young man closes Kuzmin's mouth and looks at him coldly, then asks if the man was planning to spit something out. At this point, Kuzmin starts wondering if the young man knew about his trump card. After the 5 seconds, the capsule explodes in Kuzmin's mouth, and he begins to suffer from the effects of paralysis. Kuzmin tries to regain composure, knowing he'll lose consciousness in 3 minutes. Kuzmin starts moving his hand toward his coat to grab the antidote, as it would be his only way of surviving. The young man quickly grabs Kuzman's coat and yanks the antidote out of it. Then he tells Kuzman that he must be really curious about how the young man knew all of this. Kuzman begins to think that he's indeed very curious. The young man says he won't tell and calls him an idiot while starting to consume the antidote. On the verge of death, Kuzman gets angry at the young man's actions. Rakiel wipes his mouth and comments that the medicine tastes really bitter. Kuzman asks the young man to return his antidote, but Rakiel says that's not going to happen. Then, Rakiel throws the antidote bottle on the ground and says he won't give the antidote to the genius who poisoned himself. At that moment, Kuzman loses consciousness and falls to the ground due to the poison's effect. The young man takes advantage of Kuzman being down and applies pressure under his fifth thoracic vertebra, about 1.5 inches on each side at the heart transporter point. After performing the maneuver, Kuzman starts vomiting the smoke that was inside his body, so the young man decides to apply the antidote he had stored in his body when he took it. With 0.1 liters of antidote, the young man uses his ability to send it directly into Kuzman's body. A notification pops up on the young man's status bar, informing him that Kuzman's treatment was successful and that his life expectancy is now 21 years and a few months. After this treatment, the young man receives 3.81 extra days of life, but the system rounds it to 4 days. In total, the young man now has an expected lifespan of 118 days. Rakiel feels pleased with the news and asks the knights to arrest the man who is still lying on the floor. The young man says he'll take what he came for and then return to the palace. At that moment, some knights who went after the gladiators are injured and defeated by Damien. The knights are surprised by the strength of the gladiators, so the young man shows up and tells Damien he should have stayed in the room. The knights are surprised to see the young man there, and Damien begins to think. Rakiel approaches Damien and asks if he now believes that the young man is the crown prince. Damien remains calm and lowers his sword. At this moment, a flashback from Damien's past plays in his mind. When Damien was a child, he saw his own mother die, and from that day on, Damien was completely alone in the world. Damien felt abandoned. Then suddenly, he wakes up in a bed in the crown prince's palace. After waking up, Damien sees the young man and a doctor looking at him. Garden introduces himself to Damien, saying his name is Piero Garden, the crown prince's chief physician. Garden shakes Damien's hand, and Damien also introduces himself to the doctor. Rakiel says that's enough with the introductions and tells Damien to follow him since the day is going to be busy. Garden asks what the young man plans to do, and Rakiel asks if the doctor doubts something. After gathering all the gladiators in the Moxibustion clinic, which is a room full of beds, Damien asks what kind of place this is. The young man says, obviously, it's a treatment room. One of the gladiators says that not only did the young man get them out of that horrible place, but he also let them stay in the smaller palace to receive treatment. The gladiator asks why the young man is being so kind to them. At this moment, the young man thinks it's normal for them to find it strange since it's not like anyone is doing this out of pure kindness. Especially since most of the gladiators are young, around their 20s, and the oldest is in his 30s. The young man realizes that if he frees them all from the curse of the brand, his life expectancy will increase significantly. But if he tells them that, they'll think he's crazy. Rakiel says nothing is free in this world, and if the gladiator thinks the young man is being kind, he shouldn't get his hopes up. Rakiel says that he's filled with diseases and very sick. One of the gladiators says the whole empire knows about it. Rakiel gets angry at the gladiator's comment and starts thinking about how he'll make them suffer a lot during the treatment. Rakiel says that the current royal doctors can't cure him, and no matter what treatment he receives, his condition only worsens each day. He adds that's why he's trying to heal himself. Then the young man asks Damien if he knows why he's doing this. Damien replies that he thinks everyone is here, so the young man can test new treatment methods, and everyone is shocked. Rakiel asks Damien what he thought about the treatment he received. Damien says that after the first session, the nerve pain practically disappeared. The gladiators begin to realize that the treatment is good, so the young man asks if anyone is unsure about the treatment. When no one speaks up, the young man is pleased to see that his plan is working. The young man decides to go full throttle without fear. Then Rakiel says that he will start the treatment now and asks everyone to take off their shirts and lie down. Many screams are heard throughout the room, as the treatment is quite painful, using hot stones to get rid of the curse of the brand. After 6 days, the young man notices that everyone seems to be feeling ill because they are vomiting and sweating cold. The young man understands that these are symptoms of withdrawal from not taking painkillers, and that continuing with moxibustion treatment will be difficult, seeing that Damien seems to be doing fine. The young man asks if he doesn't feel dizzy. Damien replies that he does. Rakiel asks if he doesn't want to vomit, and Damien answers that he's holding it in. The young man is surprised by Damien's resilience, but then remembers that Damien is the protagonist of the story. Rakiel realizes that he will have to use other treatment methods for now. Rakiel says that the treatment will be finished for today and tells everyone to rest and drink plenty of water. Rakiel asks Sergio to stay since he's showing the worst symptoms of withdrawal. Sergio says he's fine, but can barely finish the sentence. Rakiel says Sergio is not fine at all, and that he will help him with an acupuncture needle. Rakiel isn't entirely sure if the acupuncture treatment will work. But since Sergio has taken painkillers for longer than the others, his symptoms are worse. The young man decides that Sergio will be the perfect test subject, so he begins with the pressure point near the stomach. Rakiel starts with the running point, and suddenly a purple glow surrounds Sergio, who charges at the young man, trying to strike him with both hands. The young man is unable to react because of Sergio's strength. After looking at Sergio's face, the young man realizes that his pupils have completely disappeared, as if he's being controlled. At this moment, Damien appears and strikes Sergio from behind, knocking him out. Damien helps the young man up and asks if he's okay. The young man replies that he is, realizing that Sergio had a seizure because of the withdrawal symptoms. Rakiel wonders if this could have been caused by even a slight stimulation. Rakiel understands that Sergio's nervous system is sensitive right now, as anything could feel like being stabbed. The young man gets the idea to solve this situation by using a much finer needle. The next day, the young man starts reading a letter that had been sent to him. The letter is from the blacksmith, stating that following the young man's orders, he could forge a needle as thin as a thread, but he couldn't guarantee that he could make several of the same size. The letter also mentions that it would be much easier if it were a dwarf artisan, and then there's an apology from the blacksmith. The young man takes a deep breath and starts thinking that this is driving him crazy because he doesn't have much time. Rakiel puts his hands on his head and starts to panic when a message appears on his status window, indicating that the young man's internal organs detected stress. The message says that stress is the cause of many diseases and that the young man's internal organs are advising him to resolve the stress. At this moment, illustrations of characters representing the young man's internal organs appear, and the organs discuss how it would be best for the young man to calm down. A new notification appears on the young man's status, asking if he's forgotten that he received a guide on how to use the HP points he had gained. The message says that by spending HP points, the young man can summon monsters or unlock abilities. The young man decides to use his gacha ability to summon a monster. The system informs him that it can summon a powerful monster with a strong personality, loyal to its master and full of abilities. The system tells him that the gacha summoning costs 300 GP for the first round. The status indicates that the young man has 500 GP points, and then it asks if he wants to try his luck with the gacha summoning. Rakiel chooses yes and hopes for a good summon. Then the system informs him that the gacha summoning round is starting, and 300 GP points have been consumed. The system asks the young man to specify the abilities he wants the summon to have, and the system informs him that the monster will have the abilities he desires. The young man says loudly that he wants lots of thin needles, and that he wants a summon that will produce a ton of needles. The system confirms that the young man's request has been registered, and then 3 gift boxes appear for the young man to choose from. The system informs him that Candidate 1 is the pig that knows oink, Candidate 2 is the iron shit flush, and Candidate 3 is the shitting cactus. The young man is confused about why these names. Then the system informs him that all 3 candidates meet 100%, 50%, and 0% of the young man's request. And once he makes a choice, there's no going back. So he should choose carefully. The young man realizes that there's a jackpot, a meh, and a total failure. After spending the entire night thinking, the young man feels as if his heart is going to explode with frustration. Then his heart urges him to just choose the shitting cactus. After choosing the shitting cactus, the system confirms that the young man chose candidate number 3. The box starts to open, and the young man desperately hopes for something good. Suddenly, a cute hedgehog appears in the young man's hand. The hedgehog's name is Gigosium. The system informs him that the size of the hedgehog can be changed by feeding it sunflower seeds. Below the hedgehog, there's a red bag, and the young man wonders where that came from. The system informs him that the red sunflower seed makes the hedgehog grow huge, and its effect lasts for 12 hours. The blue sunflower seed should be given to the hedgehog before the growth effect expires because its function is to make the hedgehog shrink. The system lists the hedgehog's abilities, including infinite spikes level 1, meaning that every time a spike is removed, another grows in its place. Hedgehog charge level 1, which makes the hedgehog transform into a full spiked form and charge through everyone. And tricolor spike explosion level 1, causing the hedgehog to shoot spikes in white, brown, and black. With the pain varying based on the color of the spike, the young man asks the hedgehog if he can pull one of its spikes, and the hedgehog just repeats its name. Rachiel asks if that wouldn't hurt or anything like that. Then the young man decides that he wants one of each color. The young man starts testing each of the spikes to understand the pain they cause. And after testing the white one, he realizes it's light and perfect for use on the gladiators. After testing the brown spike, he realizes it's so painful that it burns. The young man figures the black spike must be incredibly painful and decides not to test it. Rachiel starts thinking about how sinister the black spike is and resolves to test it on someone another day. The young man feels excited because the needle problem has been solved, and now he has Gigosium in his possession. After entering the Moxibustion clinic, Garden asks what that is on the young man's shoulder. Rachiel asks the hedgehog to say hi and tells Garden that it's named Gigosium. Garden asks how the young man got it, and Rachiel says Garden should ask the hedgehog for the details. Garden begins to wonder if this is an invoked monster, because 300 years ago, the genius engineer Lloyd Frontera had a hamster, a snake, and other summoned monsters that helped him. Rarely do summoned monsters appear to chosen people and volunteer to help them for life. Summoned monsters are truly rare and mysterious beings. Garden starts to think about how the young man managed to get one of these monsters. Garden begins to think that there's something about the young man he still doesn't understand. Sergio apologizes to the young man for what happened yesterday and says that the crime he committed is worthy of death. Rachiel tells the gladiator to calm down, saying things like this happen when you're in excruciating pain. Rachiel says now it seems Sergio doesn't feel anything, no matter how many needles are used in the process. Sergio is confused and says the young man didn't do anything. Then Rachiel replies that, in fact, he already has. At this moment, we can see several needles pierced in Sergio's legs and in all the gladiators who are lying down receiving the acupuncture treatment. It seems like a mirage because the young man is everywhere. After completing the treatment, the young man is notified that the preservation of life medical ability was activated due to Damien and the other 13 patients receiving treatment for the curse brand. The system informs that the young man received the final life bonus and gained 80 more days, totaling 171 days of life expectancy. The system also informs that the preservation of life medical ability leveled up due to the large number of life bonuses received. The 2000 per 1 conversion rate in the status evolved to 1950 per 1, and the young man starts jumping for joy. Damien quickly finds this strange. Damien is confused about what they did to make the crown prince so happy because it doesn't make sense for the young man to be so pleased with everyone's recovery. The young man realizes he has already sorted out the gladiators, then starts smiling as he thinks about the next plan. At this moment, a soldier enters the king's room and informs him that he would like to make an update on the crown prince's report. The soldier says that 2 days ago, the 14 gladiators became the crown prince's bodyguards. The king asks if they became bodyguards, and the soldier confirms the story, saying that they are now called the Special Royal Guard and have been ordered to stay with the young man at all times. The king asks what Rachiel is offering them, and the soldier responds with a contract and benefits. The king is confused about the reason, since Rachiel is sick all the time, but now has a personal squad of gladiators. The king starts smiling, saying this is getting interesting. Then the soldier says that the young man gathered all the servants and bodyguards of the side palace and started sticking needles into all of them mercilessly. Hearing this, the king is shocked. At this moment, the young man starts calling each servant to receive acupuncture treatment. After sticking needles in one of the servants' faces, the young man asks if it hurts. The servant responds no while looking thoughtful. Rachiel is sitting in a chair with an arsenal of needles beside him. Then, the young man calls for the next servant. A few days ago, the young man was walking in the palace garden and asks Damien, who is with him, how he feels after the Moxibustion session. Damien says it still hurts a little. Then the young man says it's a shame he won't need to do that treatment anymore. Damien is surprised and asks why he won't need to anymore. And the young man says the Moxibustion treatment is over, and Damien is cured. Damien asks if that's true, and the young man responds that he confirmed the treatment's effectiveness and ended the experiments. At this moment, Damien lowers his head and thanks the young man for everything. Then, Rachiel says that before all of this, Damien should listen to him. Rakiel says that he wants Damien's sword skills, and that's why he isn't sending him away. Then the young man says he doesn't want to waste such great talent like Damien's. Rakiel asks Damien to become his personal bodyguard. Rakiel says he's not asking this just out of gratitude, friendship, or loyalty. Rakiel says he'll pay well and that Damien will have time off and benefits. The young man is aware that Damien will soon become an expert in advanced swordsmanship and will experience the syndrome of a swordmaster. Rakiel is sure Damien knows this, since he's well aware of his skill level. The syndrome of the swordmaster is a level where your senses become highly sharpened, a level where these senses can no longer be controlled. Damien will suffer from worse insomnia than when he had that brand. The young man had thought he could ask Damien to stay under the pretense of treatment, but the swordsman would probably leave for good. The young man understands that in this situation, a realistic agreement is the solution. Rakiel says he'll make an employment contract and that Damien will have paternity and maternity leave. Damien becomes thoughtful and says nothing. So the young man says he'll also include freedom to leave whenever he wants and even a mansion. At this point, other gladiators are spying on the young man's conversation while hiding in bushes. The gladiators begin to think that the young man is really good at negotiations. Rakiel asks Damien if he would accept if the work week was only 4 days. Then the young man says there's no way to refuse. At this moment, the gladiators come out from the bushes and ask the young man to hire them too. Rakiel is surprised that they were all hiding nearby, and Sergio says that the young man cured them to work for the crown prince. The gladiators say they also want to repay the young man for everything, and that they'll protect him when Damien isn't around. The gladiators say the young man promised to help them improve. Rakiel looks disappointed and says they don't want to serve him out of gratitude, but for the benefits and money. The gladiators confirm what the young man said, and Rakiel realizes they're being very direct. Rakiel understands that it's good they're being honest, because they don't seem like the type to speak much of loyalty, but instead hold grudges. Rakiel realizes it's a good idea to create a private military force just for himself, as the royal guards don't serve only the young man. If there's an order from the emperor that goes against the crown princes, the emperor's order will weigh more. The young man speaks loudly for everyone to hear that they are hired to be his exclusive special royal guards, known by the acronym GREE. After that, everyone starts cheering, and Damien smiles. The young man feels down because, even after curing everyone, he only gained a little extra life. The young man had managed to add 100 years to his life expectancy, but only gained 18 days as a reward. The young man realizes that, with his weak body, he can't go out looking for patients, so he decides to set up a clinic in the side palace. In the meeting room, Damien asks the young man what he meant, and the young man asks if Damien doesn't know what a clinic is. Damien says he does, but it's strange. At that moment, Garden starts to shiver and calls out to the young man, making Rakiel jump. Garden starts crying and says he finally understands how noble the young man's heart is. Then Garden asks if the young man wants to help people in his clinic. Rakiel replies yes and says Garden finally understands the nobility of his feelings. Garden says that even when sick, the young man doesn't forget the well-being of the citizens. Then they both perform a little skit and say it's all for the citizens. Rakiel says he plans to treat the people from the side palace first, and Garden asks if he will really do that. Rakiel assumes he'll create a clinic in the side palace, and then asks Garden if people will be able to receive treatment comfortably. Garden says that, since the palace still belongs to the crown prince, people won't feel very comfortable coming here. Rakiel says he needs publicity and should share success stories of treatments to attract more people. Rakiel says the more people know, the more they'll want to come to the traditional medicine clinic at the side palace. The young man had already treated 500 patients, but he's frustrated because they're all healthy now. Rakiel is frustrated because, even after treating 500 people, he only gained 2 more days of life. He urgently needs a really sick patient. At this moment, the young man remembers that he has the files of each of the 500 patients. Garden says he did what the young man asked and gathered the information about families, genders, ages, and the diseases they have. The young man realizes that if the side palace staff is healthy, it's better to check the health of their families. The young man starts looking for someone seriously ill among their families. After searching for a while, the young man doesn't understand why he can't find any sick family members. The young man notices that only 10 pages are left out of the 500 he has, and so far, all the families of the palace staff are healthy. Damien approaches the young man and says he's disappointed. The young man then asks him why. Damien asks if he can ask the young man a question. Then he asks if the young man sees patients as tools. Rakiel is confused, and Damien says that the young man mentioned needing good testimonials. So he's been trying to get as many patients as possible. Damien says it now looks like the young man is looking for someone who is nearly dying. Garden interrupts and says that Damien is being rude, as the young man must have his own reasons for this. Raquel starts trembling and thanks Garden, then says that Damien is not entirely wrong. Garden apologizes. Damien tells the young man not to be like this, as he is embarrassing a loyal subordinate who is trying to defend him. Garden jumps back in and says that Damien is being too harsh with his highness. After a brief argument, the young man asks them both to leave the room. He begins looking through the remaining 10 pages, and finally, he finds an interesting piece of information. One of the employees had written on her form that she has an 8-year-old brother who, once or twice a month, starts trembling all over and foaming at the mouth as if possessed by a demon. The employee said she had taken her brother to various doctors, but no one could figure out what was wrong. She had written that even the clergyman praying fervently for him couldn't help, and that they said they had done everything they could to expel the evil spirits. After reading this, the young man is happy and decides that he will help the employee's brother. The young man asks the employee to bring her sick brother, and she brings the boy for the young man to see. The employee says that the boy is her younger brother, named George. The boy has red hair, just like his sister, and Raquel greets him. The boy responds with a greeting, calling Raquel Your Highness. The young man tells him to just call him Raquel, as it's fine. Raquel realizes that it's the boy's first time in the palace, and the first time meeting the crown prince, so the boy seems more scared than curious. To calm the boy down, the young man gives him a candy. The boy briefly looks happy, but quickly goes back to looking scared. The boy tells the young man not to touch him, so Raquel asks why. The boy answers that he's cursed by an evil spirit. The boy says that's why the other children make fun of him and say he's strange. Raquel says that's not true and that the boy isn't strange. The boy says he fought with the other children yesterday because they tried to imitate him and provoke him. The boy says he got lost and suddenly felt everything go dark, so the young man asks him to explain. George says he sometimes feels these strange sensations out of nowhere, and his body starts shaking on its own. He says his whole body trembles and goes numb, as if he's floating, but then he falls to the ground. George says that the sky starts getting farther away, and he hears strange sounds. Then, the boy says that when he wakes up, he can't gather strength. Raquel says he understands and tells the boy that even so, he's enduring all of this. At that moment, Raquel hugs George and tells him he's a brave boy. The boy gets emotional and starts crying, then tells the young man not to touch him because he's possessed by evil spirits. Raquel begins to feel the boy's aura and says that these aren't evil spirits. He then uses his pulse meter to diagnose the patient. The system informs that the patient has a healthy body, but due to irregular brainwaves, symptoms of seizures have been detected. The system warns that this could lead to severe generalized chronic seizures, also known as epilepsy. The young man begins to think that there's normally no problem, but because the brainwaves are going out of control for unknown reasons, it could cause full-body seizures and make the patient lose consciousness. The young man says that even if the boy was possessed by evil spirits, there's nothing wrong with him. He starts to smile and encourage the boy, then tells him to remember that he's the crown prince, and so he's always right. Raquel starts thinking that he was lucky to have discovered the boy's epilepsy, but he couldn't figure out the cause right now, trying to treat him. The young man begins to feel crazy because he doesn't have the right equipment for the exam, like an MRI machine. At this moment, the boy starts calling for Raquel and says he's feeling strange. The young man realizes that the boy is having a seizure. Everyone gets worried, and Garden says that the child is really possessed. Then Damien draws his sword and tells the young man to move away. Raquel gets irritated and tells Damien to stop, then says that this has nothing to do with evil spirits. Raquel says that the boy is sick and needs care and protection because of this illness. Raquel says the boy is suffering now and asks Garden to bring a pillow. After placing George's head on the pillow, they notice the boy is shaking a lot and foaming at the mouth. Garden says that the boy is drooling a lot and asks the young man if he should clean him up with a towel. Raquel says not to, explaining that the boy's mouth muscles are spasming, and if something goes wrong, the boy might bite the towel and swallow it. Raquel says there's not much they can do right now, and that they'll only be able to help the boy after the seizure passes. Suddenly, the young man starts to feel mana emanating from George's body. The young man realizes that it's the Israhan core technique. The technique is very sensitive to the flow of mana, as mana is essentially the circulation of energy. Raquel realizes that if he can observe this precisely, he might be able to discover the cause of the epilepsy. The young man begins to concentrate mana in his body and places his hand on the boy's belly. After seeing the boy's mana flow, Raquel realizes that the flow of mana is everywhere, going wherever it wants. Raquel decides to concentrate because such an opportunity doesn't come often. The young man uses his mana to create a version of himself within the mana flow in the boy's body, so he can explore and try to find the cause of the epilepsy. Raquel starts walking in the mana flow and feels that he's in the boy's spinal cord. After passing through the cranial nerve, the young man starts to feel tired but decides to keep going. After a lot of persistence, the young man finds the vagus nerve and realizes this is the cause. The wrong signal in the vagus nerve is triggering seizures in the brain and body of the boy. Raquel returns to his body and asks Garden to bring a blanket to cover the boy. Then, the young man tells everyone to let the boy sleep because he needs rest. Raquel tells them not to make any loud noises or cause any disturbance. After saying this, Raquel collapses to the floor, and everyone gets worried about him. Garden tries to wake the young man up, but is unsuccessful. The young man is happy because he managed to find the cause of the boy's illness and can now treat it. After nightfall, Raquel wakes up in his bed with a headache. He realizes he fainted because he had pushed the Asura core technique to the limit while inside George's body. Damien asks if the young man is awake, and Raquel jumps, feeling like the devil had come for him. Damien says that the young man slept through half the day, and Raquel asks how the boy is. Damien says that George woke up at night, but is still tired. Raquel says that's normal because the boy's seizure was pretty severe. Then, Damien says that the boy went back to sleep after eating. The young man starts thinking that he knew it was possible, but didn't expect to make such an accurate diagnosis using the Asura core technique. Raquel realizes that this is way better than X-rays or MRIs. After discovering that the cause of the illness is the vagus nerve, the young man understands that there's only one way to treat it, which is through vagus nerve stimulation. Damien asks where the young man is going in the middle of the night. The young man finishes getting dressed and says he's going to be struck by lightning. After a walk with Damien, the two finally reach another area of the palace. The guards seem puzzled, but seeing it's the young man, they're confused. Raquel thanks the knights for their hard work and asks them to take him to Xanatis's room, please. After walking through the palace, they finally reach the door to the room. The door is adorned with lighting decorations, and without wasting time, the young man bursts it open. Xanatis, who is sleeping in his pink pajamas, wakes up startled. Xanatis is the palace mage. Surprised by the young man's presence, Xanatis asks what he wants. Raquel apologizes for the intrusion and asks a favor from the mage. Raquel makes a silly face and asks the mage to hit him with a lightning spell on his back. Xanatis is left confused. The previous day, Xanatis had gone to talk to the emperor and heard that the young man had changed a lot recently and had been doing a lot of strange things. The emperor said that the young man had been doing so many odd things that even the emperor was worried. The mage thinks that everyone becomes a fool when it comes to their children. The mage had served the king for many years, so he knew his deepest thoughts. Raquel starts shaking the mage while asking him to strike him with lightning. At this moment, the mage realizes how much the young man has changed. Xanatis starts staring at him, realizing that the young man is really crazy. The mage asks why he would do such a thing because if something goes wrong, the mage would be executed. Raquel says he's not asking the mage to do anything bizarre, like kill him. He just asks for a bit of electrical stimulation that won't kill him. The young man asks the mage to keep the stimulation going for 3 hours without a break. The mage thinks this is absolutely bizarre. Lightning magic is inherently very destructive. A lightning spell cast by a high-level mage could rival a natural disaster. Even so, the young man wants the mage to reduce it to static electricity and maintain a consistent voltage for 3 hours. To do this requires extremely precise control. The mage says the young man is asking for something extremely difficult. The young man starts thinking that this would be like driving for 3 hours, maintaining a speed of 30 kilometers per hour. Raquel says that's why he came to Xanatis, as the mage has the best mana control. Raquel says there wouldn't be another mage as good in the Empire. At this moment, the guards and Damien start thinking about the young man's words, and the mage begins to like the idea of taking on the challenge. Xanatis tells the young man that something unexpected might happen. Raquel responds that if anything happens, he won't blame the mage. He says that even if he gets hurt or dies, he won't blame him. Raquel says that those around them will be witnesses. They start to think they don't want to get involved in this. Raquel says he's not scheming anything and just wants to save someone. The mage agrees to help him and asks when they will do it. The young man says they'll do it now. The mage decides he can't use electricity recklessly on a child and needs to test it first to ensure it's safe. The mage asks if the young man is ready. The young man starts raising his mana concentration. At this moment, the mage prepares to cast the electricity on the young man. Using his staff, the mage starts controlling the energy waves to make them at a static shock level. The young man begins to feel pain and realizes this is great, as expected from a great mage of the palace. The young man decides to turn this electricity he's absorbing into electrodes and then introduce electrical signals. He decides to introduce signals that are directly opposite to the wrong nerve signal occurring in the boy's vagus nerve. Rakiel realizes that by controlling all these nerve signals, he can use the Asura core technique. He feels the technique is really strong. Rakiel is surprised it worked on the first try and asks the mage to stop the shock waves. Xanades asks if the young man wants to stop because it hurts. The mage says he can do this all day. Rakiel says it hurts and asks the mage to stop. Later, in the young man's room, the servants and guards begin gathering at the young man's request. They don't understand why, since the young man also wanted to gather the gossips. At this moment, everyone is watching the young man sitting in a chair in front of the sick boy, who's sitting on the young man's bed. Beside them is the palace mage. Rakiel starts holding a needle and says he will be honest with the boy. He tells him that the medicine is bitter and the medical treatment hurts. George asks if it will hurt a lot, and the young man answers that it will only hurt a little, like a pinch. The boy says it sounds like it will hurt, and the young man replies it won't. Quickly, the young man pricks the boy's neck with a needle and says he's done. The boy didn't even feel it. The young man proceeds with the next step and begins receiving electricity from the mage. After seeing that the electricity is flowing well through his mana core, the young man hopes the gossips will spread the news. Garden begins to feel sick watching the young man receive the electrical charge. The young man hopes they spread the news of this innovative treatment, as that's how marketing is done. At this moment, the young man begins holding the needle stuck in the boy's neck to transfer the processed electrical currents. As he enters the mana flow in the boy's body, the young man feels he's in trouble, as the mana flow is getting out of control. The young man realizes the flow is going to explode, and the boy will seize again. So the boy asks how long he'll be like this and starts to feel unwell. Rakiel begins running inside the boy's mana flow, knowing he has at most 3 minutes to fix the issue. In the worst case, he only has 1 minute. So after reaching the vagus nerve, the young man decides to introduce the opposite signal into the electrode. The young man realizes the situation is bad because he doesn't have enough time. Even if he uses all his mana, the process will still take 30 minutes. The young man starts thinking about stopping the process and treating it next time. Rakiel realizes that if the seizure starts, the people in the room will spread strange rumors about it. Rakiel doesn't know how long the mage can help him, as he's not sure if he'll get another chance. The young man realizes that someone sick like him doesn't have time to be careless. So Rakiel asks the mage to increase the power of the lightning spell to 3 times more. Xanades is confused, and the young man says he'll explain later. The mage says it will hurt a lot, but the young man says he doesn't care. At that moment, the mage begins to increase the level of his magic and casts a stronger electrical charge on the young man. Rakiel realizes he only has 10 seconds before the seizure, so he begins absorbing more mana to process it faster. Rakiel begins to see the location for the electrode and decides to place it on the carotid artery. Quickly, the young man wraps the nerve and starts transferring the electrical charge because he only has 5 seconds. The boy begins foaming at the mouth, as time is running out. As the countdown reaches its end, the young man gives everything he has to stabilize the vagus nerve. With 1 second left and the boy about to seize, the boy starts feeling better, as Rakiel managed to finish the process just in time. Rakiel exits the boy's mana flow and asks if he's okay. The boy's sister notices nothing happened, but the boy starts losing consciousness when a headache begins. Rakiel feels relieved because it was a close call, and then he starts feeling his body going numb. A notification pops up on the young man's status bar indicating that the level 2 medical treatment fee request has been activated, and the patient George has undergone vagus nerve stimulation treatment. The young man receives 3 more days of life, totaling 161 days of life expectancy. The young man is happy because he gained a few days. Another notification appears, showing that the young man maximized the use of the Asura core technique to withstand the intense stimulation of his own body, and in doing so, he surpassed his own limits. The system informs that the young man's Asura core technique leveled up, and with that, the young man gained a 130% increase in mana. The system also informs that the requirement to level up to the next stage is whatting 200 GP points, and the young man now has only 200 GP points. Rakiel is happy with the upgrade of his core and the increase in impulse and amplification. The system informs that the young man successfully resisted the powerful electrical simulation, and as a result, his lungs and large intestines gained metal energy and resistance to wood energy. Since metal resists wood, the organ that holds wood energy, the liver, awakened. At this moment, another illustration shows the characters symbolizing the liver entering the room where the other organs are, and the heart notices that a newcomer has arrived. The character arrives irritated and slaps one of the organs, saying they wanted to make him a novice. The system informs that the young man gained 300 GP points because of the liver. The heart, large intestine, and lungs, excited by the new member, guarantee 500 more HP points for the young man. The system informs that due to the combined efforts of everything, the young man gained an additional 300 GP points, bringing his total to 300 GP. The young man is happy, as with the addition of the new organ, he will be able to gain more points going forward. Rakiel is very pleased with this day, as he leveled up his Asurahan core, awakened the liver, and even gained extra HP points. He tries to check if there are any new system messages, but all the messages have ended. The boy asks if there's anything wrong with his body, and the young man says no. Then the boy says that usually, when he feels something strange, his vision goes dark and he loses control. Rakiel asks if the boy is surprised this hasn't happened this time. The boy says yes, and the young man tells him that he'll stay like this from now on, for the rest of his life. The boy is surprised and his eyes start to shine. Rakiel confirms and tells him he won't feel any more pain, then adds that if he's lying, tomorrow the boy will become the prince. Everyone around them is surprised, and the boy's sister starts crying with happiness. The boy, delighted, runs to hug his sister, and the young man watches the success of his treatment unfold. Everyone starts crying with emotion, and the young man hopes they spread what happened in the room about his good deeds because they all witnessed it. The young man is happy because now is the time for a crowd to enter, seeking treatment, and in this way, he can cure them and gain extra days of life. Rakiel is determined, as this way, he could live a healthy and long life going forward. Suddenly, once again, the young man faints, as it was expected after pushing himself too hard. He begins to sleep in his bed. The young man starts feeling his body stiffen and wonders how long he's been sleeping. Damien, Garden, and Xanades are near him. Garden asks if the young man has woken up, and Rakiel asks if they've been watching him sleep, and if they have nothing else to do. Garden says he's so tired of seeing the young man sleep, then starts crying and says that's why he was hoping the young man would wake up soon. Garden says he prayed a lot for his majesty, and Rakiel is shocked to see Garden crying again. Damien says the young man slept for 2 whole days, and the young man is surprised to hear this. Xanades asks if the young man was trying to kill him. Xanades asks how he could explain to the emperor that his son fainted due to the lightning magic cast on him. Rakiel laughs and apologizes, then asks if George is okay. At this moment, George appears behind the group and says he's fine. Rakiel asks why the boy is here, and George says he disturbed Garden until he could come in because he wanted to give the young man a gift. George hands the young man a rope necklace with a carved wooden heart, then says he wanted to give it to him when he woke up. Rakiel asks if the boy made this while he was sleeping, then starts looking at the necklace, thinking it's a bit much to receive. Rakiel starts thinking he did all this just to increase his next life expectancy, so the patients shouldn't feel too touched by it. The boy starts smiling and says he also wants to become someone great and help others, just like the young man. The young man is surprised and tells the boy that the necklace is very well made, thanking him for the gift. Rakiel says the best reward he received was seeing the boy get better. He tells the boy he needs to rest a bit more, as he's still tired. Garden says everyone is leaving now and asks His Highness to rest well, and the boy waves, saying he wants to see the young man next time. Rakiel waves back and says goodbye. Rakiel starts looking at the necklace, thinking about who would wear something like this, as it's simple and has no jewels. Rakiel puts the necklace on and decides to sleep. The scene begins with one of Rakiel's servants heading home. The servant's mother asks why he's home today, and the servant answers that he got a 5-day leave. The mother is curious, and the servant says it's a special leave. The servant's mother asks if the crown prince gave him this special 5-day leave, and the servant responds that most people on this side of the palace get special leave. The servant's father asks how the prince's health has been these days. The servant says that the prince is much better compared to before, and the servant's father says he's relieved to hear that. The servant says the prince has been doing a lot of strange things lately, and the servant's father asks what kind of strange things. The servant answers that the prince keeps saying he wants to provide treatment to other people, then shows a paper to his parents. At that moment, several papers fall from the sky, and after opening the pamphlet, they realize the young man is offering medical treatments. The pamphlet shows a picture of the young man and information stating that a clinic is being opened in the palace, and that treatment will be free. The pamphlet also lists the various types of treatments offered at the clinic. At that moment, the young man looks out the window and notices that the rumors are spreading quickly. Garden arrives, and the young man, already in a doctor's coat, says it's time to go. Raquel tells them to head out. They begin walking, and Garden mentions that the young man woke up early. The young man replies that today is the first day of operations for the traditional medicine clinic in the side palace. Garden says he brought the medical ingredients the young man requested. Raquel asks if Garden also brought the liquorine, and Garden replies that he took special care in looking for it. Raquel says Garden did a great job, as he'll need it a lot, even though it causes a shopping panic. The young man says he wants Garden to buy as much as possible. Garden says he understands, but there's a catch. The young man doesn't understand what Garden means. Garden asks how the young man learned to do all of this, and the young man is still confused. Garden says that the young man has been preparing new potions and relieving pain with needles. Garden says he's very curious because he's a doctor too. He says that honestly, he hasn't been sleeping well lately, and he's very curious about these techniques the young man is pulling out of nowhere. Garden says he can't understand how these techniques work, even though he's trying very hard to figure them out. Garden says he's a little upset about this. Raquel becomes thoughtful and realizes that the doctor beside him is genuinely upset. Raquel understands that Garden feels pathetic for not being able to figure out the principles behind the techniques the young man uses. The young man understands what Garden is feeling because he's also a doctor. Raquel says he comes from another world, which confuses Garden. The young man says that in that place, he wasn't a prince, but just an ordinary person named Lihan. Raquel says he made a living using traditional medicine techniques, and that's what he's been using. Garden asks why the young man is using these techniques, after considering it for a long time, and is in disbelief. Raquel says that's why he decided to tell the truth. Garden asks the young man to stop teasing him and to just tell the truth. And Raquel says he just told the truth and asks what else Garden wants to know. Garden says he wants to become a doctor and feel the same kind of satisfaction that the young man feels. Raquel says that Garden is already doing that, and Garden is confused. The young man says he's done talking and that now they need to work. Raquel begins to think that he's only gotten this far because Garden has always been there to help with everything. Raquel hopes that there will be many patients at the opening of the clinic, and not just flies. At the palace gate, there's a sign indicating where the clinic is, and it says to follow the path to the side palace because the traditional clinic is there. Raquel thinks that the best thing would be if people don't get scared because it's the prince's house. He feels like he's going crazy and starts hoping for a lot of patients. The young man opens the clinic window and welcomes everyone to the traditional medical clinic of the palace. Unfortunately, there's no one outside the clinic, and this leaves the young man extremely frustrated. The young man begins looking like a zombie and starts descending the stairs of the side palace. Garden asks the young man to look down, and at that moment, the young man sees a bunch of people inside the side palace. The people are fighting and cutting in line because they desperately want medical treatment. Raquel realizes that, since it's the first day, it's going to be very busy. Raquel starts measuring pulses and seeing patients one by one in his room. Then one of the servants asks the young man what he should do. Raquel tells the servant to do a round and see which patients need the most help. At that moment, the young man notices that the medications are being prepared incorrectly and that everything is a mess, as it will take time for everything to become systematized. The system informs the young man that by attending to many patients and gaining a lot of experience, the young man has leveled up his pulse reading skill to level 2. The system informs that after reading the pulse of the target, the young man can check their health condition. The system informs that the young man can now obtain the results by checking the general health verification report and will be able to gather more information about the patient's original organ symptoms if the young man has already awakened those organs in his own body. Raquel is surprised because the internal organs are now part of the pulse reading. An illustration begins, showing the characters represented by the young man's organs, saying they will have a blind date. The system informs that the results of all the internal organ consultations are available. After activating the skill, The young man starts reading the pulse of the old man he's attending to and realizes that his heart and lungs are good. But his large intestine shows a medium case of constipation, and his liver shows signs of hepatitis, so the old man needs to stop drinking. Rakiel realizes that the old man's liver is in bad shape because of alcohol. Another piece of information shows that if the old man continues like this, his liver will die in 5 years. Rakiel realizes that internal organ consultations are amazing because a full diagnosis is the most important thing in treatment. Rakiel decides that he needs to awaken the other organs. He tells the man that his liver is badly damaged, which is why he feels tired and his face turns yellow. Then Rakiel says the man's liver is tired. Rakiel says he will prescribe a minor bupleurum decoction for the man, and he should take it for 10 days. Rakiel says that depending on the next diagnosis, he will also prescribe cinnamon extract and pill. Looking seriously at the man, Rakiel tells him to stop drinking from now on. The man is shocked at the idea of having to stop drinking, and Rakiel says that because of his liver, the man won't live more than 5 years if he continues like this. Rakiel asks if the man can't eat without drinking alcohol, and the man responds that he can't. Rakiel says he's ordering the man to stop drinking, and this order comes directly from the crown prince, not the doctor. Rakiel says if the man disobeys, he'll end up behind the bars. After hearing this, the man is stunned. After a while, the young man finishes the clinic's activities and prepares to continue the next day. Rakiel tells all patients who are not in critical condition to come back tomorrow. The servants thank the young man for his good work, and a maid apologizes for the wrong medications. The servants say they're not sure if they've been doing a good job. Rakiel tells them not to worry because they did well. He tells them to keep working hard tomorrow. The young man starts thinking that since the concept of nurses doesn't exist here, there's not much to do. The young man realizes that the situation would be very critical if patients needed nurse care, so he needs to establish a system for nurses. At this moment, the young man starts thinking of Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Lee, who were excellent nurses at his clinic in his previous world. Suddenly, Garden bursts into the room where the young man is and says there's a patient who urgently needs attention. A man arrives carrying a woman on his back and says he's the eldest son of the Dinrier family and shows respect to his majesty. The man asks the young man to save his mother, as she's very sick. After placing the woman on one of the beds, the young man says her fever is very high and immediately asks how long she's been like this. The man answers that since this afternoon, she was fine before that. The man says she started feeling cold in the afternoon, and after that, her condition worsened. After measuring the woman's pulse, the young man realizes the woman has a disease that wiped out over 40,000 of Napoleon's soldiers. Rakiel is shocked by the woman's illness.